Okay, we are recording. Hi, everybody. This is David P. France, and I'm coming to you from Basel, Switzerland. Before we get started, I would like everyone that's watching, knows about what we're doing, to like our videos, subscribe to our YouTube and BitChute channels, and also share the video with your friends and your family and your colleagues. Let them know what we're up to. We are showcasing creators and creatives, that's what I say. And under this umbrella, under these two terms, if you will, are artists. That includes dancers, that includes writers, that includes singers, songwriters, also inventors, people that hold copyright and intellectual property or patents, right? Small business owners and entrepreneurs and thought leaders as well. So if you're interested, and if you know someone who's interested in hearing the stories, hearing the backgrounds, hearing these thoughts that the people that I brought in for these interviews, if they're interested in hearing from these people, please share the video. This is the only way that we get out there and that people know what we're up to. So with that, I want to introduce Danae Johnson. Danae,
hey,
how are you doing?
Dave.
This is Danae's second. Is this our second interview? Yeah.
It's our second, yeah.
It's our second. I'm thinking it's like our third, maybe because we had a pre-interview. Danae is a professor at the law school. Let me make sure I get this right. Oklahoma City University.
Yes,
Right?
that's
Okay.
it. You got it right.
Geez. There's also an Oklahoma State, right?
Yes,
right? But I don't know if
they don't have a law school.
They don't have a law school.
No.
That's right. Well, I'll ask you later how the school came, how it was founded. You know how the school was founded? Because it seems like it's.
No, I don't know how it was founded. It's old.
It's an old school.
It's an old school. And the law school in particular, they used to teach law in barracks. So I don't know what kind of makeshift history the school has.
Right.
But it's an old school. And
Yep.
Oklahoma City is the capital, but it wasn't always the capital of the state. So I think it's an interesting history, Oklahoma, and the development of the state coming from land that was preserved for Native Americans at the end of the Trail of Tears, right? And so this was reserved land, to President Harrison opening up that land for primarily white settlers who wanted more space.
I see.
So that Native Americans get here, they have this land, it's their land, then Harrison opens it up to people to have the land run. The land run had Black people who were free, white people, and some Native people who participated in the land run. And that's how you get development of all of these Black cities. It's also a time where this man named McCabe, he was a Black man who came from Kansas, spoke to President Harrison and asked him to make Oklahoma a Black state. There were lots of people working on Oklahoma because this would be people coming out of slavery, being able to get this land to begin their new lives.
Right.
In the end, Harrison said no. But,
And now there's a Supreme Court ruling, from what I understand, where they've said that this certain swath of land is.
It's a huge swath.
Yeah.
And it includes the city of Tulsa, which has its own rich history, but that land is actually Native land. It was land that the U.S. had promised. And on that land, the state government should not prosecute crimes. That those crimes have to be prosecuted by the Native authorities or federal authorities. So all of the crimes that were prosecuted by local and state authorities, there's a problem with that. That shouldn't have happened.
Right.
That's one of the big things that the case makes us think about. And so it's the McGirt case, which is a criminal law case, but it has these land implications.
Oh, man. Hey, look, I'm thankful. Thank God I went to law school, even though I didn't graduate at the top of the class, more like at the bottom. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Okay. However I got in there, that's the way I got in. Okay.
However you got out, that's the way you
However I
got
got out. I think I talked to you about that before. Anyway, Danae is a law professor at the Oklahoma City
Yes.
School of Law. Jeez. And today, the reason why we're having this conversation, we're going to go right to it, right? Because there were two topics that you wanted to discuss, and I'm going to let you tell the audience what those are, and then we can dig in.
Okay, absolutely. So the two things that stay on my mind are race. Maybe there are three things: race and women. And I started a consultancy during the pandemic to do some training on those issues. So that's what I'm working on. That's everything I read, everything I'm doing. Those are the things that are important to me.
Now, why are those things important to you? I mean, it's a stupid question, but why are those things important to you?
Right. I shared during that first interview that I'm from Detroit. It was 85% African American. So the thing I got to think about was being a woman and what does it mean? I could think about that and talk about that because I knew that the things that made challenges for my parents to achieve, for my mother in particular, it was about her gender, not exactly about race.
Mm-hmm.
So it let me think about feminism. And she was a police officer. So I thought about the role of women in work, how that happened. My grandmother worked in a factory. And so again, I looked at the role of women in work. So women have always been mega important to me and where we fit into the world. As I grew and developed, I was able to look at race. And what makes you able to look at race is discrimination and where you find it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought about those things in a secondary kind of way. And now in Oklahoma, there are not enough women making dynamic change, and there are very few minorities making dynamic contribution and change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that's important to me. And it's not lost on me that my family's African American, so that brings up race, right? And I have a daughter. So all of that's important to me. And so it's so funny. Why is it important to me? Just recently, someone was asking me about my intercultural development and what made that interesting to me and how I had been able to think deeply about these issues. And the answer was surprising to me. It's about having kids for me. In some ways, that made my desire to expose my children to different things greater. So I always loved to travel and try things, but when I had kids, I wanted to do it more, not for my benefit or my pleasure, but to expose them. So my efforts to expose them have given me an opportunity to think more about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that would happen. I didn't think that would be one of the upsides of parenting. Because that's a perilous thing.
Right. So now that you've said that, what are your thoughts about the current generation? We're going to get back to the race and women, but what are your thoughts about the current generation? You talked on this, you touched upon this during our last conversation, in terms of what you know and what you know about how things work, maybe, and what they know. And you can also look at what your parents knew as well, because I'm not going to tell you what my opinion of this sort of triad is, but there are three distinct ways of being and thinking. So how are you managing that with regard to your children?
It's so interesting. I'm very close with my mother, and the women of my family, they did a lot of investing in me. And as I look at our different generations, our different groupings, it's funny. I don't want to say, oh, those young people, they so different, they don't know, because feel like that's what every generation says about the young people that they know. So I would rather big up the young people. When I speak to young people, they inspire me. It's the language that is hard for me to get together. They have it. They can talk about race and gender in very eloquent ways. They are the part of a movement, this Black Lives Matter, that really, my generation, we didn't have a movement. My mother's generation had a movement, right? But we didn't get a movement. We did a few little protests and march on campus, right? But I wouldn't say we were having a movement.
No.
Right? So that it was not a movement.
It was a different movement. It was a different
movement.
Yeah.
And it surely wasn't on the scale that we see the civil rights movement that happened in the 60s or the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening now. So when I look at young people, I admire the progress they're trying to make. And I admire this thing that they are doing that we didn't do. They are actually trying really hard to make new systems. You and I in our pre-talk, we talked about the creation of systems. They are trying to create systems. And I think we need to encourage them to do it how they want to do it. They are using social media, how they get together, how they decide what they're going to talk about in ways that we don't. And I think we should encourage that and try and help without trying to take over and give them instruction, which is really our way. We would like to take that over and tell them you could do it better if you did these 3 things. But I'm not sure that's right. So I like young people. They work my nerves, but they are really trying to do a lot of things, and we should encourage it. They are trying to create things for themselves with an entrepreneurial spirit that we didn't quite have. And I think we hold this fear that they might fail. And instead of that fear, I want to replace it with, that's okay. If you fail, you could try again. That's okay. If you fail, we'll figure out what's next. I want to encourage them to try and to fail and to fail and to try and to fail and to fail and to fail. But I think we didn't want to fail. They don't want to fail. We didn't want to fail. And we took a lot of safeguards and more safe routes so that we wouldn't fail, which was to our parents, whatever we did was adventurous. I remember there was a colleague, a friend at Penn who got a job and offer from Chubb. And Chubb was a big company, but we were from Detroit. We had never heard of Chubb. And she said, how am I gonna go back and tell my mama I'm working for Chubb? Right? So she didn't even pursue that.
Really?
It could have been fabulous. Absolutely, because she got another fancy job. Because we got some jobs out of Penn.
Like you guys did, y'all got them. I did not, but we digress. Keep going.
Well, I ain't get them either. I went straight to law school, but a lot of people had nice jobs.
Right.
So she picked something else. But it would have been wonderful to be able to take that job at Chubb and not worry about what other people at home were thinking.
We're thinking.
Exactly. We have parents who are saying things like our parents, don't you quit that good job. Don't you quit that good job. That was a thing. So I want to encourage my kids to quit all the jobs and find a job that they want and do what they want to do and fail and be okay. And fail and be okay.
Just don't ghost. Just don't ghost. You know the ghosting.
Yeah, don't ghost me. Don't. I'm not playing that. Don't ghost me.
Because one of the things, and we go back to what we were originally talking about, was that this generation, they will ghost you in a minute. Meaning it's just not showing
exactly. You'll be thinking, is my phone charged? Because they ain't called me. They ain't gonna call you.
I mean, it was like ghosting. I mean, and in fact, there was another panel who I was talking to, and this topic came up with their daughter. Not that she was doing it, but she knew people that were doing it. And he said, if you do anything, don't do that. And she's like, oh, don't worry, I won't. But the very fact that they had the conversation of ghosting.
I have a girlfriend. I said, oh, well, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? And she gave me the details. I said, oh, but you didn't mention your son, the oldest one. I said, is he coming home? She goes, no. I said, oh, well, where is he celebrating? She says, we don't know because he won't tell us. I thought, what in the world? I just said, oh, okay. Because you don't want to make people feel bad. But I was like, what in the hell? About? So I don't want to be ghosted. So I do have to be on good behavior. So I don't get ghosted.
So back to what we were originally talking about, which is the topic of race and women, right? Yeah. So you've told us why it's important to you. So how are you going to move into this space, or how have you addressed it, at least personally, right? Okay, consulting company, but give us some ideas of how you're going to address it personally. And
so when I think about addressing it personally, I think there's this whole thing, Black folks and women, we think we know a lot about diversity and inclusion because we live it. Just because you live some don't mean you know anything about it, which is my example is we get it wrong a lot. When we talk about immigration, if there's a right side or a wrong side, Black people get it wrong. When we talk about gay, lesbian, bisexual, sexual orientation, sexual identity, Black folks get it wrong a lot. And so we live in it and we think we know all about diversity and inclusion, but we don't know about the practice of diversity and inclusion. We sometimes are low on self-awareness because I think self-awareness is a luxury, really. And for generations of Black people, we've not had the opportunity to relax, relate, release, and become all self-aware because you had to work from sun up to sundown.
So wait a minute. All right. So all right, you said when we get these things wrong, right? So we get the LGBT part wrong. We get the what's the first thing you said? The immigration. Now, what do we get wrong specifically? Do you have a specific example of how we get it wrong?
When you, and you know, I'm talking in big generalizations, right? Because I will accept all day that Black people are not a monolith.
Right.
But when you hear a lot of well-heeled, educated leaders talking about those issues, they say the exact same words that white people say about those issues. And it seems to me that a lot of those words are without deep thought about it could be me. That it is just parroting words that we hear from other places, as opposed to doing some research and thinking about what are the deeper meanings here. I think it's that kind of self-awareness we need, that the kind of awareness that I don't form my opinions on any given issue based on what I hear someone else say.
Sure.
That I have given some thought to it. So when I say we get it wrong, what I really mean is that we are not thoughtful and self-critical about the conclusions that we make. We are parenting most often the most loud or popular responses to challenges in those areas.
Yeah.
An example might be the unisex bathroom. You know, Black people don't like no unisex bathrooms.
No.
Because something bad could happen to you. But if you go to a cafe in France, you go to the bathroom, it could be a man standing there. I remember the very first time that happened. Lots of bathrooms are unisex, and they've been that way for 1,000 years. And that's not creating a whole bunch of brouhaha. But we're having a lot of issues here in the States trying to figure that out. And when you hear African-American leaders speak on that issue, instead of looking for solutions, I think they also are creating and participating in the brouhaha.
Well, you know, I'll say this: the unisex bathroom example is it hits a lot of buttons, and I think one of the reasons why, I mean, that doesn't prevent people from presenting the issue, right? Because if it's controversial, it's gonna hit buttons. But I think sometimes it's the, what is it? It's not the message, it's the messenger, right? So it's who actually presented that as an idea that we should have a conversation and at least try to change laws around, right? So it's Obama, it's Obama. And it makes me reflect and realize, like, let's say when you're trying to move change through, right? What sometimes happens with people is that they don't strategize in terms of how to get something through, right? And I think, this is just my opinion, in the second term, Obama's back was against the wall in many respects.
Yes.
And it was not necessarily the right timing in what is to present such an idea, because he already was, his tank was getting, he was depleting his tank, right? So, the idea, I understand, you presenting the idea, but in terms of, and I understand, how we as Black people view that idea, right? So I get it, but as an aside, I say, sometimes when you present these ideas, even in the women, the female realm, right, or the women's realm, it's the same thing.
Yes.
Or the minorities.
When I think about the unisex bathroom issue, I didn't tie it to Obama. I think about it from way back. When I went to Paris, I went into the bathroom and I could tell it was the bathroom. And when I walked in, there was a man in there, and I jumped back. But then I realized I was in the right place and he was in the right place. And there were all these stalls and we were washing our hands. He was washing his hands and I was about to use the bathroom. So there have been places that have had shared toileting for a very long time. When I think about military service, when I think about locker rooms, I've always felt like, why are the boys most often showering in big rooms? Why are they going to the bathroom in front of one another?
Women have stalls,
right? When you go into the ladies' room, they got stalls. When you go into the men's room, they got urinals. So it has always been a thought to me, why don't we afford everybody the amount of privacy that they need?
Oh, okay.
And I think that creates problems. This idea that there's certain groups that get privacy and there are other groups that don't get privacy. And when you treat the groups differently, perhaps the group that's been deprived of privacy, in this scenario, men, it's easy for men to then tell women they don't deserve privacy. So all of those things have always been swirling around up top. What does it mean that certain groups have shower stalls and bathroom stalls and other groups don't have those things? Why are we doing that? What's the point?
Let me ask you another question with regard to LGBT. I think another reason why the bathroom gender issue was such an issue was that there was, again, controversy regarding the person who was presenting that, right? In terms, and let's just be honest, and this may be controversial, in terms of his sexuality and his wife's sexuality, and it colored the whole
political discussion.
The whole political discussion. So in other words, had it been someone who really was, let's say, when I say an ally, really an ally, a bona fide ally, not someone posing as an ally. And I'm going to say that,
right.
Someone who is actually outside of the community instead of inside the community.
Yes.
Anyway, it may have turned out differently, right? So in other words, people didn't necessarily trust it because they didn't trust the person that was actually presenting it as an idea and trying to resolve the issue, right?
Right.
I only say that because And,
I know.
I had to say it. With regard to what you've previously outlined, which is, okay, we get it wrong. It's almost as if we're not up to speed with what the general, how do you say, where society is going, right? That's one aspect of it.
Yes.
And then another aspect I think you're saying is that we're not looking within and sort of processing it, because we as minorities were just on the outside of an issue that was also not popular.
Right. And as minorities, we are in a system that tells us our source of information, that we're not qualified to opine, that our source of authority comes from the outside. So we are looking outside for our source of authority, as opposed to developing our own well-reasoned theories and opinions.
Wow. You know what? You have a lot of work ahead of you. You know that, right?
I do.
I'm just saying.
I look at it like this. It's just everybody has to just take the one little step. Whatever it is, whatever your work is, you got to be stepping to it. And you got to end the day thinking, okay, it was a good day. I made a little step in that direction. Oh, okay. I did something, and just day by day, I think.
So when you talk about, all right, I interrupted you. You said we generally get these things wrong. You said, okay, we talked about the first thing, which was what we as Black people get. What was the first
one of them
thing?
was immigration.
Immigration. The second thing was LGBT. What other issues that you see at the forefront with regard to this? Is there anything else that you see?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One of the things that I think that we as a community are hesitant to do is talk about race. We don't want to talk about race, and we don't want to teach our kids about race. And I think that gets it wrong. I think
so we talk about how do you think we talk about it, and how do you think we should talk about it? So what bring me back to sort of how we talked about it, coming up, or at least our families.
This is my question. I think people our age, the answer is going to be yes. Did you watch Roots?
Yes, I did.
We did, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has anyone shown their kids Roots? Nope.
Oh, all of our generation?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
No.
That's a problem.
And why is it a problem? Why do you see it as a problem?
It's a problem in this way. I think somehow we think our kids can't watch Roots. That it's a horrible thing. It's too horrible. Maybe that's why we're not showing it. And it's not as though we're supplementing with something else. We just think it is not the right thing for our kids to see. So we're sheltering our kids from those things, but they watching all kind of other stuff and doing all kind of other things, but we're not talking about race. I think sometimes we still have this hurt that we don't want to share. It's the idea, it's kind of like this. So if we go back a generation, you might have heard this. Black people don't swim. Black people don't swim. What's that about? And even now, there are more Black children who die because they couldn't swim. Now, today, there are issues. We don't have pools. We don't have accommodations. Those things are not easily accessible, all of those things. But way back when we said Black people didn't swim, we didn't say the other thing. And when we have an opportunity to swim, they kick us out of the pool. They won't let us swim in peace. They chase us away. When the great actress dipped her toe in the pool, they drained the pool and cleaned it with bleach. They arrest Black people for going to the pool. We don't have conversations like that about race. And I think that allows young people, Black and white, to draw conclusions, because that's what children do. Children try and explain the things that they see. And so when they see an absence of Black people, they make the conclusion that that's not for Black people, that maybe Black people can't do it. When we don't talk about the things, the real obstacles and barriers, we allow people to be misinformed.
Well, there's two sides to it, or more than two sides, right?
A
Thing is,
thousand.
well, first off, I will say the pool was a major issue. Okay, the pool was major in a lot of ways, and I have someone who I'm planning to talk about just on the hair issue with the pool. So, just to throw that out, that was a pre-interview I did a couple of days ago, and we talked about that. That was that's a major part of being afraid to go into the pool for what the hair was going to look like after. Yeah. The other thing is that when you think about the integration of pools, I think was the integration of schools happened before the integration of pools, right? I mean, real thing.
Yeah.
Right. That's real talk. And people don't really, we don't have that conversation. People don't realize that we're just, even though we have affirmative action and all these folk are getting in the schools and doing all this fancy stuff, that's only recent. That's a recent development. That is only one generation ago in mass. So, I mean, I say that to say, you hit the nail on the head. On the pool issue, like, resonates. And just so you know, the reason why my father he can swim still probably, and he was a diver, but he grew up in a segregated pool. Right, so he grew up in Baltimore, so he was a lifeguard for segregated.
Exactly. Yep.
It's
now,
interesting.
I don't know how to swim, and I have taken lessons as a 40-something-year-old woman. So a few years ago, so I can do a little bit, but my children know how to swim and they know how to dive and all of those things, because I didn't want them to have limits. And I view not being able to swim as a limit.
Sure.
So I have exposed them to all of those things. And I'm really admiring Sigma Gamma Rho, that's sorority. That's their thing. They have Black kids who swim. And they have all kind of swim camps, and they are just doing the most with Black kids learning to swim. So 2020, we still don't swim as much as other people.
And what other issues, like what other things that we talked about? Swimming, you brought up some other things as well, right?
I could bring up a million things, Dave.
What talking about? Well, today, I mean, when you think about it in terms of the history, and I was just on a Zoom call, and I told you about this before we got on this interview. History is just there's still history that I don't know about my own family that is being revealed. And I'm 53 years old. So one of the things I feel is that we don't tell our children family history. We don't tell, in particularly the things that are bad, so-called bad, like children out of wedlock, fathers leaving the family, just learned about that. What else? Particularly if they did something like a crime, that was something like that. It was something nefarious that was hidden. So in other words, the person who financed, I believe, my aunt's store and this is my great aunt and my great uncle's store, was the numbers runner, right? I've heard this man's name. I know this man's name for years, right? Because I heard it since, when I was in elementary school. I'm like, and I would always want to know about this person. And everybody in Baltimore knows who this guy is. So on the Zoom call, they brought up his name again, and I did everything in my power not to jump out and say, I know that guy. Like, because, come on, I don't need to say that, right?
You don't need that, hush.
He was the one that financed, but people didn't necessarily talk about it, right? Or, when you're married to someone, but that's not the father, or that's not the mother, you know what I mean? That
Right.
Like I found out many years ago that my grandmother's real father was a judge that her mother worked for.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right. So, and we found out when she was in the 80s. So you look different, but we don't talk about why you look different.
Right, right, right. There is a woman who recently, she wrote an article and she said, we need to talk about race, and race is clearly a problem. And she said, and my very being is a testimony to that. The way I look, who I am, tells you the story of race. And I think that's so true. And when you do the genealogy, you see all of these things that might be surprising. You didn't know how Irish you were. Right? You didn't know that. You're not connected to your Irish heritage. But part of this is, so that's for Black folks, this self-awareness of who we are. And I work a lot in poor communities and we talk about wheels. And poor people always are like, I don't have nothing to give. But everybody has something that they want to give. And what little thing you don't value, somebody else might be interested in. So we do financial planning and wheels, and we have clients who are formerly incarcerated.
Wheels, what are wheels? Wheels, what are wheels?
WILLS. Wheels.
Oh, wheels. Okay, wheels. Like wheels in the state. Like wheels. Oh, wheels in the state. Well, yeah, well, this is big. This is big, the wheel thing. Because we don't do wheels. So we've been talking about that. We don't do wheels, right? No. So I've been working on these things that, again, we somehow are not doing as a community, where we need to be working on that. But we always talk about this idea that Black people have kids and relatives that you don't know about until the funeral. Right.
And we got a lot of obituaries where somebody got a special friend. And we just, that's true.
Right.
And dad's special friend, right? So mom's lifelong companion. We have those kind of things in our wheels, in our obituaries. So we got to figure those issues out. So I think it's true, Dave, we don't tell these stories. And sometimes in my family, we have an absent father figure. He left his family. That's because he was accused of whistling at a white woman. So he left. He left and went north. And over the years, he brought all the family north, but that was the impetus for leaving. So sometimes it's for the nefarious kind of thing, but sometimes it's for a life-saving reason.
Yeah.
Why people have left their families and left everything they had, their land, their business, everything.
This is a statement. This is my own personal statement about what you've just said. I also learned on Zoom call that my grandmother's father left and started a whole new family.
Yep.
And then when one of the siblings tried to see him, he was like, oh, yeah, well. And then when she went back to see him the next day, he was gone. He was a cook somewhere. He was gone. I mean, when they were telling me this, my mouth was hanging open, even though it wasn't really, on the video, it wasn't hanging open. But in my mind, it was open because I was like, oh my God, right? And one of the things that my cousin first removed said was, we went through a lot. She said, we went through a lot. But, Danae, people would make the argument that every group that comes to the United States goes through a lot. What is it so specific about the Black experience in America? This is what some people are going to say.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you what's so different.
Even look, a comment where they're doing this arts at Penn, University of Pennsylvania has this program, I think the Sachs Arts Program. They say, okay, we're going to focus on Black arts, and it's going to be curated by Black people, right? So they have this money, and it was on LinkedIn. And then somebody said, why do we have to do that? Like, why can't you just have art that is for everybody? You know what I mean? The everybody thing, right? Why? What's so different about our experience that makes us
have to do those things? Makes that of benefit and necessary. So this is my take on what's the difference. When we've done this thing in America, a homogenization kind of thing. So when the Italians came, the Irish came, the Germans came, they all got here and they maintained their traditions until they realized they wanted to have more. And in order to get more, there was a fee. And the fee was giving up some of that ethnic identity, right, and becoming American. And you can see it in each group that has come here, that part of that fee, part of the homogenization process was to stand against Blacks in America. There are articles written about young children from ethnic groups, white ethnic groups, European ethnic groups, who knew that their ticket to being a part of America was to use the N-word. Mm-hmm. That's one of the first words they learned when they got here. Mm-hmm. So then as you shed an ethnic identity for an American identity, when you stop celebrating the holidays of your grandparents, when you stop cooking the recipes and the foods of your grandparents to be American, you create this great distance between you and Black Americans who continue to be isolated and oppressed. So each group that comes here takes a part in this new overall oppression, and it's systemic oppression. That is noteworthy. That's what sets us apart. So when each group got here, they wanted this thing called civil rights. But somehow when I say the word civil rights, we think automatically in our mind, we're conditioned to think, oh, you mean Black people. Mm-hmm. I actually could be meaning the Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the Polish, all the different groups that got here. But somehow we have taken the phrase civil rights and we've reduced it to one group of people, Black people and the civil rights movement. When really civil rights is what everybody wanted when they got here. And some people were able to shed their ethnic identity and get the full host of benefits. You know, when you look at differences also happen with Chinese when they came and the Japanese when they came and how they were treated. A part of that treatment still makes them different than Black Americans because they're unable to shed their ethnic look. I'm doing an article about the development of whiteness in cases across the nation. And so you have these different laws, and the law says a person of African heritage can't do the following 10 things, and they must be educated in this one place. So then you have a Chinese kid come to the community, and the Chinese kid wants to go to the white school. The white people say, you can't go to this school because the law, even though it spoke of African descent, is how we defined whiteness. And you don't fit in. So you need to go to the Black school.
Yeah, there are examples of that. I don't know them firsthand, but I'm sure there are examples. Yeah, there are examples because then, you know.
There are tons of examples about how we are defining whiteness by, it's not genealogy back in those days, but that is when we start talking about how much Black blood you got. Yeah. There's this really interesting case. It's a divorce case, and the man is white, and he does not want to pay child support to the woman for his children because he alleges that she is not enough white.
I see.
So it's curious to me in a lot of different ways. Popular media, social media, the modern world would have you think Black people invented unwed mothers and running away from their obligations. But I got this old lawsuit where this white man is trying to leave his kids and don't want to pay no money. He would be the founder of leaving your kids in a post-slave world. Right. We could go to the slave world and look at systems where white men were creating and leaving their kids penniless and enslaved routinely. So that is not something that we should get tagged with as the Black community. We shouldn't carry that tag of child abandonment. Somehow we do.
You know what? You made some really interesting points. And as someone, I mean, you're a law professor, when people make a comment such as, well, why does there have to be specific Black arts program? And, you know, I'm an artist, right? I'm the first to say art is real fuzzy wuzzy, right? So it's not, you know, when you do something like that, it can go either way, meaning like
Yes.
it's clear that they need the money, or we don't really need to, you know, I can see both sides, right? When you're talking about admissions to colleges, right? That's a different, right? That's a different story. But I can see it. I mean, it's like the laws, people don't know the law. They don't know the laws. So when they make statements, they only make the statement from their point of view because the laws are written to benefit the majority, which they're a part of. Right?
Absolutely.
They don't understand
Absolutely.
that the foundation and, you know, the basis of how the country came together had to do with our not only our exclusion, but our how do you say it? Discrimination, our
Mm-hmm.
not only discrimination, exclusion, but what is the exploitation is the word, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exploitation,
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
exploitation. So
Absolutely. And it's in the law. It's
it's in
not
the law,
just
right?
something that people somehow felt, right? We've had places like, we talked a little bit about culture and Black towns in Oklahoma. I think at the height, there were 30 Black towns, and now there are 6 Black towns. And they are not the kind of thriving communities you think of, but at the height, there were many thriving communities of Black people. And when they were doing too well, when it smelled too good, when it was too prosperous, somehow something happened.
Yeah.
The towns got burned down, the people got burned out, the people got dispersed and murdered and tortured. And that leaves a stain and teaches a lesson that if you get too much Black unity, if it get too good for you people, something bad might happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that that is something, it sticks. It just doesn't go away, this fear uh, that something bad, this sense of dread
Mm-hmm.
that if things get too good, something bad is going to happen.
Do
For
you feel
Black folks,
do you
that has
feel
been real.
do you feel dread? And if so, how do you feel it? Do you feel dread at this moment living in the United States?
Yes, I feel dread. I feel dread. That's a horrible thing, right? I feel dread in this way. I don't know if I told this story. I was driving home and I had my kids and I have this big Volvo. I tell the story all the time. I dread that I'm going to get pulled over by the police and shot in front of my kids. That's dread.
Yeah, that's dread.
After George Floyd was murdered, before that, I used to walk the neighborhood with my kids. We stopped walking because I have a fear that somebody is going to do something or say something to my family and I'm not going to be able to make it right.
Mm-hmm.
Those, that's dread. I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't think that way. And it's dread based on race. I'm afraid of being attacked. I'm afraid of what we see repeatedly. Um, Somebody following you down the street and doing something to you based on nothing that you've done, but based on race. That's dread. And I think a lot of the work of the civil rights movement was to help to alleviate the dread. And it was a dread of things like the Klan just showing up at your house and burning crosses and those kind of things, the fear and the dread.
Mm-hmm.
Much of that had been alleviated, but somehow we have returned to Black people having a sense of dread.
Mm-hmm.
And even if, so that's me and my family in a personal way. But
Right.
if you look at what has just recently happened at Google with Black women, I think there's a sense of corporate dread.
So wait, what happened? What happened to women at Black Google? I didn't get the story.
So there is a woman, I wish I could call her name, I can't, but anybody can Google it. There is a woman who was in charge of artificial intelligence. She was one of working on artificial intelligence, a brilliant woman who was hired to help with diversity as Google develops AI and those kind of things. So she led a team and she wrote a paper and she's going to release a paper. And I believe from what I've read that the paper was somewhat critical about the road that Google was going down with regard to AI. Google wanted her to withdraw the paper and she didn't want to withdraw the paper. And she said something like, y'all are not hiring enough minorities. And if I don't get some clarity on these issues, I'll have to resign. From what I've read, the very next day, Google said, we've accepted your resignation. And so now the commentary that comes out, there were 800 employees, maybe more than that signed a letter in support of this employee who was high level, well regarded. And now more information is coming out about her discharge, termination, firing, whatever you want to call it. Some of the talk that has come up afterwards are quotes that say things like, people want to talk about diversity, but they don't want to do anything. They want you in the room because they want to look at you. It's like going to the zoo. That's a kind of corporate dread because someone brings you in to do work about diversity, innovation, technology, in theory. But when you bring some practical application, when you say something that somebody doesn't like, then you're going to be dealt with and handled. A second Black woman from Google has now come out to tell her story about being hired to seek diverse talent and being summarily dismissed from Google. So all the comments now are like, I thought Google was woke. What happened? Google was so woke. What happened? So there's also that kind of dread, the idea that you could be a chief diversity officer, but in taking that role, you understand it's a 2-year position because don't nobody really want you to be so successful.
Very interesting. I mean, we're going to get into the Black women part because we've been dancing around it and we're going to go right into it, right? Because there's stuff that I want you to present there. But I will say, and this is a conversation for another time, I think, and I think that we have been sold an idea of how work is supposed to happen. And there are all of these laws that are nicely put in as protection, but they do not offer the kind of protection that's actually needed in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Right? I'll just say that, and this is across the board, across all races. You guys hear me in the audience out there. And it's my belief. Now, I'm not saying it has to be where it's like the Teamsters or the union and they got to charge you all this money and all this other stuff. I do believe there should be more vacation. There should not be just 2 weeks in the United States, right? I'm not sure. I'm not up on the maternity leave and that sort of thing and the paternity leave. Not up on that, on those laws, but I believe there should be more vacation. There should be more responsibility on the part of the corporation to support their employees.
Now, you know, Dave, somebody in your audience is calling you an old socialist now.
Am I socialist? No. Look, let me tell you something. We're going to get back to this. I will just tell you, in Switzerland, there was a time, and maybe because Switzerland is more homogenous, right? There was a time when it was mostly men. Women only got the right to vote, I think, in 1973 here. I have to double check. But the whole idea, the whole system was that the man voted, so therefore the woman didn't have to vote because the man represented the family. Right. There's still places here where during the middle of the day when there's lunch, the kids go home for lunch because the assumption is that the mother is at home. Right? Now, what you're starting to see is that the men, also come pick up the kids in the middle of the day too. So it's not like in the younger generations, it's sort of happening in a different way. So you see the men out there strolling the cars. You see that, right? And the younger generations and our generation, we're actually pushing for this kind of progressive, right?
Yes.
But in terms of the benefits, the whole idea is that if you're putting your labor, working for a company, you should be getting some benefit, not just the pay, not just the straight pay. You are giving your life force to an entity. Yeah. So in the United States, we had that, like the Swiss, where earlier on the men all benefited from, they could like take out a loan for their house. It's sort of like the armed forces, even companies, they still had this sort of program. I think they started phasing it out once women started to come into the workplace. So you can't get the same things. Like, let's say if you're an old guard, you came up in the 50s, right? They also had generous savings plans because pensions, because the whole idea was that the man worked and therefore he had to take care of his children. And so they designed it so that the company actually gave a helping hand to making sure that the men were able to secure their house and take care of the kids and take care of his wife.
Yeah.
Right. So we're in a process where that is changing, but still in terms of the makeup of who stays at home and who goes, but still the change is not as big in terms of what has happened in the United States, where you get nothing. You get nothing. You get 2 weeks. So in other words, I believe, and maybe this will be my movement, there should be a call to action with regard to strengthening the laws with regard to employer relationships, what it means to be an employee, and not just superficial stuff that they throw on there that when there's a crisis, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
You got to hire an attorney just to get something that you should get from the very beginning. And that's a different way of thinking. And I think it's part of, it's not just a race thing. It's now that our generation, we're getting stripped. Where things are getting stripped from us, right? And we don't even realize it. And then maybe if we do, we're not taking a stand on it. You shouldn't.
So it's so funny. Yeah. My grandmother was a union steward. Yeah. And that was unusual. So she worked in a factory, also unusual, but we lived in Detroit. So she worked in a spark plug factory and she did fine work with her hands. So you needed little fingers. And in her shop, there were women and men, different ages, different races. So she was the union steward. And if something was going wrong or you didn't like something, you talked to the union steward. So she was a big UAW person. And she talked about how the unions were so necessary because the unions protected the workers and made sure workers were treated fairly. So she has passed away. But if you were to engage her in a union conversation, she would say, the reason we're in such bad shape now is because we don't have the union.
Yeah.
She wouldn't even want to talk about all of what we might say the unions have done, and we find them to be distasteful and unethical and those things. She said at the end of the day, the union provided for the workers and no one else looked out for the workers.
Yeah, you need some. In Switzerland, they do have a strong union here. Like any change that goes down, even a multinational change, it has to go through the union, the Swiss Council, right? So I say this to say, I hear you're 100%. Even the way people get fired in the United States, right? I think it should be different. Anyway, so with regard to Black women, right? We want to make sure that we hit on this. Your focus is on Black women, and why? Can you tell the audience why this is important. You've touched on it, but there's something else that we talked about in the pre-interview as well, right?
I don't know. It's because I'm a Black woman, and the women I know in my life, they're Black women. This idea that I looked at being a woman, and then I looked at being a Black woman, and I think intersectionality in time has become more real to me. What it means to hold multiple identities and attend to all of them at once. That is increasingly difficult, problematic for a lot of people.
When you say intersectionality, just briefly explain to people what intersectionality is, because this is a nouveau term
So
in
the atmosphere, right?
the atmosphere, yes.
Intersectionality. We can thank Kimberly Crenshaw and her great work, Professor Crenshaw, for bringing up intersectionality. And it's this concept that you can be a woman, you can be a minority, but when those two things come together, is there something different and unique about your experience, the experience of a minority woman? You can be disabled, you can be a lesbian, you can be Hispanic. If you brought all those things together, because you are one person, you can't divorce yourself of any one attribute. Does that shape how you experience life and the law? And the answer is yes. There might be certain things that are reserved for certain types of treatment that are reserved for women. Can I also benefit from that treatment as a Black woman? It depends on how we treat Black people. So that's intersectionality, trying to look at the different identities that you hold and ask whether or not that impacts your experience.
And so the consulting business that you are putting together, how do you, what's your plan? Do you have a short-term plan or a long-term plan, or how do you see this unfolding with regard to the group of people that you are offering your services for or to?
So my plan stays the same, and it's short-term, long-term, medium-term, all of that. I'm trying to change the world. That's my goal. That's what I'm trying to get accomplished. And how I go about it at different phases is different. When I work with clients, there are two types of clients. There are clients who also want to change the world. They feel a need, they feel compelled, they recognize that things are not fair, and they want to do something. That's one kind of client. That's the client that is excited to be engaged in thoughtful work around diversity, inclusion, and race. Then there's a client who feels like my employee should know something about this. I'd like a 1 hour, 15-minute training because I'd like to be able to say that I gave everybody some training. That's a different kind of client. They are excited, but they're excited about different things. They want to see the progress in a more narrow and short-term way. They want to feel like they've done something, but they're not as invested as that first type of client.
Sure.
So I work with both groups, but how much I give and what we do is different. I think talking about race, diversity, and inclusion is important. And I always bring up race because we have been talking about diversity and inclusion for more than 20 years. And I suggest that if it had been effective, we wouldn't be where we are in terms of relationships, cross-cultural relationships, relationships with different people in terms of race, if that had taken a hold. But somehow we've done this work, but it's not working. I think to ignore race, to fail to discuss race, keeps us from getting to know one another, keeps us from creating employee engagement and security, keeps us from telling stories, sharing history. So I think we got to talk about that. So that's what I'm encouraging people to do, to talk about race, to talk about their own ethnic identities, to learn, to educate themselves. I think it takes time, and we have to view it as everyone's responsibility. It's just not the victims of discrimination to try and teach the world and heal the world. We didn't create these systems, they existed before we got here. Everybody is a part of the system, and so everybody needs to work on it. So that's the message I'm trying to put out.
Okay. Well, Danae, it's really interesting. If you recall, we would have these conversations at Penn. I mean, hours on hours on hours and hours and hours. So if I appear like a socialist to people in the audience because I say something about, having stronger labor laws, it's because I actually fell under those laws and were affected by those laws. And I can understand or see, look, the corporations should not be God. Okay, I know there are people out there that believe that it is, or they believe it's a person even. The corporation is not a person. I don't care if Mitt Romney says it or anybody else says it. It's not. It's not. It's not. It cannot be defined as a person. It is not a person. It's a legal entity, but they should not be ascribed rights as a person. Sorry. So I mean, we see the history of a corporation long enough to know that it has not always been that way, right?
That's
we know
right.
that.
That's
we
right.
Know that. We know
it has not always been that way. And we can also, if we go back far enough, part of the corporate charter was community, well-being, and people.
Of course.
We've lost that portion of the corporate charter.
Yeah, of course.
And now the corporate ethos, it's about making returns. And one of the problems that creates as we talk about developing systems, right? Because you mentioned this, we don't have robust pensions, right? Most people have to save for their own retirements. More people now than ever are somehow invested in securities markets. Because if you have a 401k and you have mutual funds and those kind of things, it's all tied to the market. So the very people who might want a corporation to do something fair and ethical are the same people who need a corporation to make profit.
That's right.
So somehow we're all co-opted into the profit-making system that can push us towards unethical behavior. So it's a huge challenge when we don't have freestanding pensions. When each individual has to figure it out.
It's huge. And look, I just so you guys know, I put a challenge before Danae, and I told her, I said, look, today you should write a book. It's like, when you're in law school and they give you them big fat books that you got to buy money, you got to pay like $100 for a book and you got to buy 8 of them, that kind of nonsense. I mean, in my mind, I can see the whole thing develop in that way where, all of the subjects that we've talked about have some connection, not some. There is a connection to law that's already out there that exists that will show you what we're talking about. And every single thing that we've talked about, there is a case. Right, or legislation to reinforce what we've been talking about.
Yep, it's so true.
You just can't watch television, Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC, and thinking you're gonna know or be on top of what's happening or could be happening.
Yep.
In the United States.
Very true.
Right.
And so it's that kind of thing. Somehow we're failing to teach critical thinking, and maybe it's about the art and creative thinking and moving the gears up here. We're like missing that somehow. So we don't have dynamic discussion, dynamic creation, which again is this ideal of there could be failure, but that's okay, because in the failure, there will be some successes as well. But we're not empowering people to do that. It feels like there's a lot of risk all the time. And I think people feel like they're in jeopardy of losing it all the time.
Yes. But I will say this, right? And this is where, although I may seem like a socialist or anti-capitalist or even an atheist even, right? I'm neither one. I see it all. You know what I mean? I see a place
Yep.
for everything. And that's when God has to come in and step in. I mean, in other words, you have to have faith.
Yep.
That what you're doing, or even what you're being called to do, is going to work out. And that's a whole other discussion that has race or your gender. It really doesn't have a place. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're talking to God, it's not about, in my opinion, it's not about your, or as I can see it or feel it, it's not about your gender or your sex or your race. It's really like, okay, what is you being called to do? If you're trying to do something, have faith, right?
It's that personal relationship that we're missing, because a lot of us are being taught to pray and taught to understand what we receive by people who may not have our best interests in heart. By people whose perspective is shaped by race and gender, how they see us and how they see themselves. That's a challenge. So there's this huge discussion within the church, particularly the Methodist Church, this racial reconciliation and trying to figure out what is it that the church needs to do with regard to race. How should the church be responding to things like the George Floyd incident? Right. Is that a place for churches to respond? How do you work with your church that has white missionaries going places to make the world better, and somehow their whiteness plays a role? What does that look like? So I'm like that kid on in that movie where he said, he looks around, he goes, I see dead people. You know, that he's a little kid and he looks around, he goes, I see dead people. That's how I am about race. I see race
everywhere.
I see race.
Look, we're gonna have another discussion. We're gonna have this one it wasn't loosey goosey. We did plan, you guys. We planned. It wasn't loosey goosey, but this is how we talked back in the day when we were in school. We were all constantly flipping ideas, throwing it out, seeing this work. Always, right? And I think part of this, the inspiration for the channel, was that's what I wanted to return to, right? So, but I'm pulling everybody in, anybody, or the creators, people from all over the world that have these types of questions, right? And I guarantee you, there's somebody that's going to be from someplace else that sees this video, sees this interview, and is going to be like, wow, right? Because, you know, for us, it's sort of like, it's rote. I mean, it's just there for us, right?
Yeah.
But these are new ideas, Danae. I mean, for a lot of people.
I think that's true. I think that's true. And I want to leave with one idea that I think is really important as we think about the new year, right? Because this is late December when we're filming this. As we think about the new year, I think we got to ask ourselves, who do I want to be in 2021?
Absolutely.
And we got to try and answer that question. Who do I want to be? And if you want to be somebody who is able to connect with people across difference, I would challenge you to do some reading. There's so many great books out there. There's so many wonderful ways to get exposure and to explore the world, even while you're at home during the pandemic. There are lots of opportunities. Spend an hour a week thinking about those things. That makes a change in a year. So who do you want to be? That's my big question. Who do you want to be? And once you answer that, get working on that. You can do it.
With that, I will let that be the last word, right?
All right.
Does that sound good?
Thank you so much.
Look, it's a pleasure. I mean, this is the way you guys, this is the way we rolled back in the day, right? I'm just letting y'all know, anybody that's watching the video, this was not every day. I would even say this was almost every weekend.
Yeah,
in a gathering, in our own dorms, probably every day for some of us, most of us in a certain group, not everybody. Those who didn't think about it, I would even say that I'm not saying this is a big jump, that they're paying the consequences for it. No, that may be too much, right? It may be, but I think that kind of thinking is now needed in this present time.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you're
Absolutely.
not thinking, and it's not just exclusive to race. I'm saying across the board, even when we're talking about employer-employee relationship.
Yep. Yep.
Does
How you
our
make
generation,
money.
how to save
What do
money?
you do with money?
Does our generation, because we fall under certain laws, right? Basically, we have different student loan debt, right? That's our
Yep.
thing. That's not the baby boomer thing. That's our
That's
thing.
us.
And that's
Yes.
everybody else, every other generation under us.
Yep.
Right? So
Yep.
when we get into power, and we will, that is one of the things that we need to address.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that we will come up with a great solution with regard to how that's going to be handled. But right now, we're not in power because we're not having the conversations.
Yep. And we got to talk about it. We do. And I think we can't be afraid to disagree. It's
right.
okay to disagree. That's how we're going to come up with the great solutions to things.
That's right.
And I think it's wonderful for us to cross-pollinate people from different disciplines to talk. Because if I'm all in my one discipline, I'm siloed. I could be drawing from another discipline. I can be like, that's the solution. That's what I've been waiting for.
You got it.
So,
you hit the nail on the head. Danae, thank you so much. You guys, Danae Johnson. I'll be talking to you soon.
Very good. Very good. Happy New Year.
Thank
you so much, David.
And
I appreciate you.
No problem. And I'll see you soon. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.